recommendation. So we have this image here of a funnel. So, ideally you'd be doing your research and it would all synthesize perfectly into this one solution that is perfect and that you have all the evidence to back up for, and then you have this really strong one option that you're gonna give them. But so these are some images I found online of funnels overflowing. You don't really figure out what the limitations of Google Image are until you hit them, because these are the other images that I found, and these are the best ones. So if you don't believe me, you can try. But so there's a lot of things to consider. So even if you have one option that makes the most sense to you and it's someone that you want, unfortunately, that's not always the world that we live in. So even the first thing, the possible options, are you going to give options? So for example, with the gas policy memo that I wrote, we only said put tear gas under the regulation of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. There's no reason it shouldn't be like this, and that's the only option we're giving. But that's not always the same time. And then when you're thinking about that, one thing that you have to think about is like, what is likely to happen, knowing that, we're obviously all motivated people and we want to see change, but that the status quo is likely inaction. So in the face of that, are there going to be compromises that you are willing to live with and maybe more feasible? And are those compromises going to be better than inaction, which may happen in response to your solution, which might be so overarching that people just shut it down and it never gets considered? So are you willing to live with an incremental change? And the last thing is that you will have to go through the pros and the cons of each of the recommendations. So that includes saying the pros of a recommendation that you don't really want, possibly, or the cons of the recommendation that you have. So an example that I had mentioned earlier is that with the quicker changes to the cash bail system that we were advocating for, we recognize that a con was that in this moment of change, that the public may be really susceptible to headlines if anything bad were to happen, and that could have a lot of pushback, because as we've seen, the landscape on talking about changes to the criminal justice system, even since that 2020 summer, has already kind of bounced back and forth quite a lot. So kind of like the longevity of public support was something that we considered as well. So last exercise before I pass it off to Brittany to talk about the structure. So we're going to be shaping a policy recommendation together. So the problem is that here in California, again, its headlines have, most likely let we're undergoing more frequent and severe fire seasons. So one response of the California government has been asking people to create defensible areas around their homes. And so this is actually something that is backed in evidence that this does help people protect their home. So defensible area is just having different circumferences in which there's less brush, less things to catch on fire, so that you don't A, add to the fire, and B, hopefully you don't get engulfed by it. But the issue with this policy is that they're kind of asking you to do something without necessarily incentivizing you, because a lot of times psychology has shown that people don't think that things are going to happen to them, even though you may live in an extremely fire-prone area. A lot of people, we've seen that people have chosen to stay and fight and stay with their homes at the time and made that decision and then later regretted it. So we need to be, the government, if you want someone to do something, you have to make it easy, especially since we know that people don't want to really be changing their lives as quickly as it seems like we need to with these increasingly dangerous fires. So the solution isn't just creating defensible areas, it's how are you going to make this happen? So one could be, for example, I just was randomly thinking of these, making a PSA on the role of defensible areas. That could be good. You could be getting the information out there. Who knows how effective that would be? Don't know. Send residents tools and instructions on how to create defensible areas and make it a little bit easier for them to do that. If you need to cut down a tree, don't know what tool that would be that they could send you. It still might be really, really, really hard. You might not want to cut down that tree. You might be in love with that tree. So that still might not, I mean, like that, like I would hate to cut down like certain trees in my yard for sure. And then one is offering a free or like a government subsidized service to create the defensible area. So all you have to do is you sign up and someone comes and they make it, and that might make it easier. And then one could be cutting home insurance costs to create defensible areas, maybe increasing costs for those who don't do it. So these are all different incentives and facilitators for what is the ultimate goal, which is to have people have these defensible areas. So in the chat box, what we're gonna ask you to do is to go through some of these questions here. So everyone should have something to contribute if you are able and willing. So what are other possibilities are there? What do you think is feasible? What are the pros and cons of some of these? In one policy memo, should you even be talking about all of these? And then what information would you even need to choose as your recommendation? For example, like, have there already been PSAs and like that actually has been proven not to work? Or maybe the PSAs have been really effective and we just need to keep doing them. So things like that. So if people could get some answers prepped in their chats, and then we'll get Benay to count them down.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll give you a few more seconds to think about that.
Oh wait, should I go back?
Sorry. A few more seconds to think about that, and then I'll count down. You can answer any of the questions that you want to answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and send in your answers. How effective was Smokey Bear? Yeah, maybe that's definitely something to look into. Like maybe Smokey Bear taught a lot of people about.
I actually have an answer for that.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Well, which is that, so the Smokey the Bear thing was that all fires are bad.
Yeah.
But something that's been especially a big conversation here in California is that controlled fires are really important.
Yeah.
And that, so the Smokey the Bear messaging was actually very effective, but ultimately ended up being harmful because it reduced some of the fire preventative measures that would have been effective. So
yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think Laura said, yeah. So Kayla said, what's been done, if anything, or costs involved in creating the different programs?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So like if another state has already envisioned all this and done a pilot program, like they've done the work for you and you can just look and see how that was.
Yeah, and if it costed too much to like send residents to schools, the government's not going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like
And then,
to look into.
Or even like it's like how expensive would that service be versus like the cost of like rebuilding your town.
Yeah, as compared to like the risk of losing everything. And then Laura suggested offer 2 feasible policy options.
Yeah.
And I think that's really up to you if that's like
totally.
what you feel are like, if you think there are 2 of these options that are the most feasible, it makes sense to talk about just those 2.
Yeah, totally. So Emily just said subsidizing already existing tree services, contracting with landscaping companies. Yeah,
that's
cool.
A really good idea.
Yeah, lately I've been really liking the policy option of do nothing and doing the pros and cons of that, because I think a lot of times we are talking about that when we're doing like the introduction to the issue, but I think that like really explicitly being like, here are things that might happen if we do nothing, I think that's really powerful too. But that's my personal taste, for example.
Like, here are the costs if we do nothing.
Yeah. And the benefits, because that's a really tough exercise. So okay, cool.
So we'll pass